Okay. Megan Rhyne with the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. Thank you for coming on and speaking with us today, making with me. I'm the only us in the room, so I appreciate that.
I'm very familiar with that setup.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's the way we work in 2025. So I emailed you and sort of asked you to come on after our ongoing coverage of what's happening in Stafford County. And what we have is a sitting supervisor who was just reelected for a second term to begin in January. Her name is Pamela Young, Dr. Pamela Young. She, on October 22nd, prior to the election, abstain from a crucial vote on data centers. And for anyone who's been paying attention across Virginia, data centers are becoming just a huge issue as they continue to proliferate across the state. And this vote was on stricter regulations on data centers, where they could be located, the sound they can emit, how they're approved. And she not only just abstained from the vote, but she did not provide any explanation as to why. And so it's commonplace. I've been covering public meetings for 15 plus years, and it's commonplace for people to abstain. That's nothing new, but there's always a reason as to, hey, I can't vote on this issue having to do with the schools because my wife is a teacher, or, there's always some sort of explanation as to why. And when there's not, it raises questions from people like me, reporters who were taught that elected officials have one job, and that is to go and vote on policy. Whether they go to ribbon cuttings or whether they email their constituents on a regular basis, that's all secondary, but their first job is to vote on stuff. And if they can't, kind of tell us why. So, as I was just hoping you might be able to maybe share some anecdotal information or some insight onto what you're seeing as reporters try to, cover these issues that they're increasingly affecting more state residents statewide. And as we try to get answers from public officials, and I'll say since abstaining, we've tried to get her to tell us why, come on the record, and not only has she told us no essentially no comment, she's gone on TV during the meeting and chastised us for asking the questions and saying that asking her questions is dangerous. She says that we're setting a precedent for someone to get hurt if we ask questions in public. So I don't know, we're in a tight spot up here, and that's my personal opinion on all this, because we're obviously the one out there asking these questions and trying to get answers. But what do you make of all this?
Okay, there's a lot there to unpack. So on the one hand, I don't know that I'm not sure how much of an explanation an elected official owes anyone on any given vote. Ideally, yes, but if you think about like the General Assembly, there's all, they will throw up it's called a Rule 36 in the Senate. They don't have to explain why they did it. They can just do it. Or if they don't want to be on record, they can leave the room. So they don't vote then. Or think of it this way, people vote in the affirmative and they don't explain why. So, in some ways, we have to take that with a grain of salt about how much explanation elected officials give us when they decide not to vote, when they decide to abstain. On the other hand, taking that a step further and saying that the news media is creating a dangerous situation by asking, I would very strongly push back on that, because that is exactly what the news media is supposed to do. It's what citizens would likely do too. I'm sure there's many of them who would want to, email or place a phone call to say, hey, why'd you do that? And that's perfectly normal. I mean, that's been going on forever. As long as people are not voting, as long as people are voting, there are going to be people who are going to be asking, why did you vote the way you voted?
And whether or not they're in the press, or whether or not it's somebody who is at a community festival as resident who may have been watching the meeting, will come up to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be, a quote unquote news reporter. It could be, because in my view, and we're in the press. We pay closer attention to many things in closer detail than most. But at the end of the day, we are in the same boat as the public when it comes to getting information. We have to go through the same channels and, do the same sort of thing there. One of the things that came back during this most recent story that we wrote about this incident here. So we initially wrote a story about, obviously, the vote on the data centers. Then we wrote a follow-up trying to get answers as to why the supervisor abstained and what it all meant. And then after she went on TV during the meeting and chastised me for asking questions and saying it's dangerous, we wrote another story about that. And during the third story, we got a response from the county government saying their policy is to have all reporters send questions to the county government, so the county government then can disseminate those questions to the elected officials. And someone who is in my boat says, wait a minute, I kind of understand if I'm asking about a county policy, or asking to speak with maybe a director of a department, an employee who works for the county government. But if it is someone who is elected by the people to speak for the people, I'm wondering, why a county government wants to be the go-between or the gatekeeper of that elected official. And I'm wondering if you're seeing this pop up in other localities. You're a statewide organization, Coalition for Open Government. If you're seeing these types of policies pop up in other locations.
I have seen it pop up every once in a while for several years. I would not say there right now is some sort of general uptick or trend in that direction. But, I would agree with you. And I would, I think if you pulled any individual voter off the street and asked them, when you cast your vote, did you cast your vote to for this person to be your elected representative, or did you cast your vote for someone to be a middleman between you and this person you're casting your vote for? And of course, no one is going to say, oh, no, I totally voted for the county administrator or the school superintendent or whatever, for some middleman to field my questions, filter my questions, interpret my questions that I have for my elected officials, and then have, assuming, I don't know, then the possibility that they would do that in the reverse order as well. Here's what the elected person told me to tell you, because that's the next step, is it is serving as that go-between from what the elected official has to say. But just, I'm not sure. I mean, I know why barriers like this get put up. It is because of a fear of losing control of the message. It's very uncomfortable to a lot of people to have other people out there making comments that you don't know what they're saying, and oh my gosh, that might put us on the hook. That's incorrect. Of course, it's not going to put them on the hook for them saying that. It's not the decision of the board. It's that person's opinion or statement, of facts that they are aware of. But, so I know why they do it, but I just think it's very ill-advised on both the part of the elected official and of the government.
Now, I have heard from multiple sources that this county, Stafford County, has a policy for its elected officials that say if they do not want to, essentially, if they don't want to deal with you, whether you be a reporter or a citizen, they can filter you through that office, that county it's the county administration, and they have an office of public information, and they will send you there. And I have seen this, sort of asking for, you deal in Freedom of Information Act, that's your bread and butter, FOIA. And, you can ask a question, hey, how many employees did you hire in the past 6 months? And, instead of typing a number into an email and sending it back, they can say, oh, you have to go through FOIA, for that. You have to, it's a big official thing. And maybe you can provide some insight onto are more jurisdictions or more local governments putting up barriers like that to give, as people try to get information, just basic information from their government?
Yeah. And again, I would say that this has been going on for years all over the state at different times. So I can't say that there's some sort of upward trend. But I have seen it frequently. And so the Freedom of Information Act is an act that governs access to records. Even though it says information in the title, it is not a statute that has to do with answers to questions. So we do see, it's always been a thread, through FOIA responses over the years where people will say, I'm sorry, you're asking for answers to questions. FOIA is only about access to records. I'm declining to answer your questions.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're right. But I think they do that at their own peril. Because then they again create these barriers both to access and just a general a PR kind of barrier between themselves and the public and press that says we're going to be very nitpicky about exactly what you can ask us and exactly about what I can say. And that's just a way to drive a wedge between government and the people that it serves.
One of the things that we deal with a lot, and sometimes, and I guess the size, it doesn't really matter about the size of the organization. But I mean, just last week, I was working with a small town to try to get information about the most recent pay raises for the town council. When did they get their last pay raise? How much was the amount? And I sent the information, and it was it's 15 plus days before I, heard back. And it was after another written request and a courtesy phone call. And of course, with FOIA, you have your 5 days, and then if they need more time, they're supposed to tell you they need more time to get your records within that 5 days. And finally, when I heard back after day 14 or 15, it was like, oh, you didn't tell us you wanted a FOIA, and you didn't fill out our FOIA form on our website and go through go through our channels. And I had to educate the town manager, and it's like, that's not how it works. I mean, if you get the request for information, you determine how you want to respond to me. You don't just kind of not respond and then say it's your fault you didn't get what you want. So
and they can't force you to file a particular format. An oral request is actually a FOIA request if you're, so yeah, that would be incorrect as well. But I mean, it's all part and parcel there. So that's why I always come back to, like, I get asked a lot about, how does Virginia rank and in comparison to other states? And it's just really hard to compare states anyway, because you can have the text, exact same text of the law, from one locality to the next, one, state agency, or one state to the next. It's all about the culture. It's all about how those words are applied and interpreted. And we're just always going to get those people who are going to interpret them in ways that see it as, how can I avoid disclosing information that I didn't choose to disclose myself. How can I avoid being forced to disclose information under this statute? And that's just, because of those people, because they've existed all the time. That's why I have a job, because, but it's like the ocean. I mean, it's just, one wave comes through and then new people come in, and then, I fight the same battles year after year. We turn 30 next year, and that's, we've been fighting some of these exact same battles for 30 years.
So you kind of have the email formatted all ready to go, but maybe the names are different, but the cases and stories may be similar.
That's right.
And as we kind of wrap up here, FOIA is always talked about during the General Assembly session, which is upcoming in January, and cost is always discussed. I know Senator Danica Rome has put in multiple bills to on FOIA, and some of that is to bring down costs. So some of these costs, I can tell you one time I FOIA'd a line item budget from I believe it was the town of Dumfries. And because they stopped putting the expenditures inside the budget, it was just this rosy narrative about how wonderful everything is. And well, that's great. Let's see what you're spending on. And they wanted $400 just to, send me the copy of their budget. And so the fees should be reasonable. But, again, that's subjective. So cost is always an issue come General Assembly time. What other issues as related to open government and FOIA might we see come up in January?
Yeah, so we always find ourselves playing defense, because a lot of localities will say, here's this problem I'm having in my neck of the woods, and so they'll put in a bill that deals with some FOIA issue that they're having there. So some of it I can't anticipate, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. I do know that we are advancing 2 bills, one that has to do with agenda items and taking final action on agenda items, when you can do that, when you can't. Another bill will have to do with enforcement processes. And actually, I think this arises from something that happened in Stafford County, or when it was first brought to my attention, about a case being dismissed because they didn't have service of process by the sheriff, which was never required by FOIA. And so we're trying to correct that. I anticipate some stuff coming up about privacy and what would be termed, quote unquote, vexatious requesters, people who weaponize FOIA to either, kind of try to shut down the government or to try to embarrass somebody. I don't know that that's coming, but based on some rumblings I heard throughout the spring and summer, I wouldn't be surprised if I saw something like that.
That's interesting, using FOIA. I mean, so on one hand, I can kind of see where somebody will maybe just constantly submit FOIA requests, and that would then bog down the FOIA officer, and just constantly dealing. Maybe like you said, we're dealing with fighting the same battles all the time, but the FOIA officer may get sort of bogged down by the same request over and over again, or but. That would be interesting if someone, hey, this hey, you keep asking about, for having to do an issue having to do with maybe a specific elected person or entity or state agency or something like that who would determine what their intention was. I mean, right, to damage, right. That would be interesting to see who would have to make that determination.
Right. And it's come up several times over the years. Well, no, I shouldn't say several. A couple of times there have been legislative proposals. And that is what we always get hung up on is, who determines whether something is vexatious or is harassment, as well as, because you do it by number, but then what about reporters who file requests all the time? Or, there's a whole bunch of things. I guess, I thought it was a real missed opportunity when the fees issue was being discussed, because those two do kind of go in hand, because for every anecdote that local government in particular has about a vexatious requester, we, on the other side, there's an anecdote about someone being charged outrageous amounts of money to obtain records that they are statutorily entitled to. Because what's happening is only, ordinary people are being priced out of access.
Mm-hmm.
We just read about, Cree Deeds getting the emails from UVA. He was charged $4,500. Well, he's a practicing attorney, and so he couldn't, afford it. But could a student who had similar interests? There's no way. Could I? No, I can't spend $4,500 on a records request. So yeah, I take those vexatious requester anecdotes with a grain of salt, because I'm like, look at what we are up against so often. You guys have all the cards, literally. You guys have the records, and we are just trying to figure out ways to get what we're statutorily entitled to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I know that if a few people who I think will listen to this discussion here, and they hear vexatious requester, they've probably already changed their handles on social media to that term, because I know a few vexatious requester. I know a few of them, and that's interesting. Megan, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on and just kind of discussing a little bit about FOIA. Again, a policy that's open to everyone, not just people in the press. It is open to everyone, and it is there.
And it's nonpartisan. It's non-ideological. It just says, here, you have the right to get this access, this information. What you do with the information, that's totally up to you. FOIA doesn't tell you what to do with it. It just says you have the right to have it.
It's an incredible tool, and it is worth protecting. It's worth educating yourself on, and absolutely worth using. So how can people find out more about you and support your work in keeping FOIA alive and well?
Yeah, so our website is www.opengovva.org. Yeah, there's a lot of resources on there, and then contact information. And we're also currently looking for nominations for our annual FOIA awards for citizens, press, and government. So if you know someone who might fit that bill, there's a link to a nomination form on our website.
That's fantastic. 30 years. Congratulations on that. And will you be adding a vexatious requester category to your annual awards? No,
I think we better steer clear of that one.
Okay, very good. Guys, thank you. And thanks for listening to the Potomac Local News Podcast, and we will talk with you soon.
All right.